Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Fun with Foreigns. This is the third episode, and we are going to be talking all about Newton Comics from Australia. Newton Comics had probably the shortest run of any major Marvel publisher out there. They were barely in business for a year. They started producing comics in May of 1975 and ended in 1976 due to a lot of issues. Newton Comics was started by Maxwell Newton, who was a little eccentric to say the least. I could do 20-minute video just on his history and politics, but we're just going to keep this one focused on comics. The best source of information out there on Newton Comics was in a book put out in 2014 written by Daniel Best. It's called The Amazing Rise and Spectacular Fall of Newton Comics. I'll put a link in the bio. You can get it for less than $5. It's well worth the read. I highly recommend it, and that's where a lot of this information came from. So in 1975, Maxwell Newton struck a deal with Marvel for about 6 months worth of material. They agreed to a fee of $75,000. But all he ever gave him was the initial $30,000 down payment. He never gave him anything else, which was one of the factors, I'm sure, why they didn't succeed long term. Newton put out their first flagship title in May of 1975 with the first issue of Amazing Spider-Man. It had a print run of 30,000 and had the most sales ever of any Newton comic. 22,000 were sold, only 8,000 were returned to the publisher. Newton reintroduced several titles to Australia, but also introduced some titles for the first time, including the X-Men, the Silver Surfer, and Tomb of Dracula. Those had never been seen before in Australia. Some stuff like the Avengers and Spider-Man, those had been done before by Horowitz. Newton's did something new with the comics by adding a lot of inserts to grab extra attention. They put in swap cards, they put in posters, iron-on transfers, and they even ran some competitions, although it doesn't look like any of those prizes were ever actually awarded. Now, Spider-Man did pretty well, selling 22,000, but after that, they continued the print runs of 30,000 for most issues, and their best-selling issues after that only sold between 6,000 to 8,000 copies, which resulted in a lot of comics being returned. This led to a big problem for them as they did something even Marvel didn't do. In less than 1 year, they put out 180 separate comic magazine titles. Not even Marvel accomplished that in that time frame. So that led to a lot of back issues being returned, and before they even realized that some of these were being returned in such large numbers, they had printed nearly 1 million comics. So in the summer of 75, Newton went out and hired Ash Long, who has an article I'll also link, who has some great information in it, and wanted him to help process all these back issues in a warehouse, which at that time already had 500,000 comics in it unsold. Their plan was to redistribute these at 20% off under the new Heritage Edition title with the price sticker right over the title. They added some Thor posters to the last issues of Captain America and Planet of the Apes. And then they also just randomly added in those posters to other titles like Daredevil, The Incredible Hulk, Submariner, and Masters of Kung Fu. So some of those issues have posters and some don't. They also decided to take all their unpublished stock to that point and publish it as quick as they could, resulting in a lot of one-shot comics and giant-size specials. Now, there's a lot of stories around Maxwell Newton. Some of the more popular ones are that he was found drunk on the kitchen floor one time reciting 16th century poetry. Another time he went into the publisher at night and just urinated all over reels of newsprint that were being readied for printing. There was stories of him taking the mail orders they got in and just opening them and taking the cash out. He definitely had some issues. One thing that really draws people to the Newtons is the covers. And they really did some amazing color variations of some classics that we'll look at here. Here you have their first one they did, Amazing Spider-Man #1. This one's pretty true to the original. But when you look at this next one, the Hulk one, this is a really cool color variation they did on it, as well as Fantastic Four #1, which you see here. They had some really unique colors they did on them. The covers weren't the only draw though. The posters inside really have some gems. Like this Avengers 13 here has the poster inside from ASM 129, that iconic first Punisher cover. The Tomb of Dracula 10 issue has another awesome Spidey cover from ASM 135, which you see here. Daredevil one was also a great one they did, and we'll just look at a few of them here so you can see some of the differences and some of the appeal with these bright colors they brought to the covers, and how much that would change just the presentation of the comic itself. Now, one thing Newton did was he promoted these in the Sunday Observer starting in June 1st of 1975. These are definitely the hardest Newtons you will find, if you can find any. The first one from June 1st and the second one from June 15th both contain Planet of the Apes inserts, and if you find one of these, I would definitely grab it. Newtons were also some of the first foreign editions to see really significant gains in the foreign comic market, largely because of these beautiful covers they did, and people started to chase them and collect them. And now some of these are, well over $1,000 on eBay to get these complete with the posters. And I think they got a lot more room to gain after that still. Now later I'll be doing other Fun with Foreigns videos on other aspects of Australia, because there is a lot to it. You also have Yaffas, you have Federals, and you have Horwitz. All three very collectible and more scarce than the Newtons. So if you're looking for a good way to start with Australian comics, the Newtons are a good way to start because they are a little more abundant, but they're still pretty scarce. When you look at originally, the best issues only had 6,000 to 8,000 of each sold, and the rest were returned. So there's not many of these out there, but there's even less of the other ones. But I wanted to start with Newtons to give you an overview of how those are. So it was a very short-lived publication company, less than a year, and they made several mistakes. Probably the biggest one was overestimating their print runs, and of course not paying Marvel what they owed them. So that led to a lot of issues for them. And even in the final months, you had where the employees were getting their checks, and it was almost a race to the bank to see who could get there first in case the checks bounced. So what Newtons gave you was some really beautiful cover variations to the Americans, where you had some really nice colors that were added that weren't used in America, that really just gave the comics a different feel. It really adds some great variety to the cover set collectors, and I definitely recommend adding them to your collection if you like those complete cover sets. And I wouldn't wait too long. They're not getting any cheaper. Every month or so it seems a new record is set, whether on eBay or through private sales of these comics, and I don't see them coming down from where they're at. I think they have a lot more room to go up. So if you're considering them, I wouldn't wait too long, or you're going to be paying more. So that just gives you a nice brief history of Maxwell Newton and Newton Comics and some of the history around it. Hopefully you learned maybe a thing or two you didn't know about them. A lot of people aren't aware of the Sunday Observers, and I think those really have some great long-term potential because they're the first appearances of many of them. But that's going to about wrap it up for this episode of Fun with Foreigns, all about Newton Comics in Australia. We are going to do 2 other parts in the future about Australia. They won't be next, but they will be coming, concerning the Yaffas and the Federals and the Horwitz. But our next one is going to be all about Greece. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Follow me on Instagram. I do weekly shows on Whatnot on Tuesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern. We are the first ever all foreign comic sale that runs every week, and we've been doing it for 1.5 years now on Whatnot. So hope to see you there. Thanks for tuning in. It's always a lot of fun doing these. And I hope you guys score some good Newtons out there. Good luck.